When I look back on it now, I can almost feel the taste of cigarette smoke on the roof of my mouth, the sharp sting of whiskey at the back of my throat, and the hollow weight pressing on my chest. That was the season of my life when I believed I understood women, believed I understood myself. I was wrong about both. This story isn't easy to tell because each time I do, it's like ripping open a scar that never healed properly. But maybe that's the only way to make sense of what happened, by dragging it out into the light again, no matter how ugly it looks. Her name was Claire. The first time I saw her, she was standing at the far end of the bar, framed by a flickering neon sign. She wasn't the most beautiful woman in the room, not in the conventional sense, but she had something more dangerous, an energy that pulled you in, like the air before a thunderstorm. She laughed at something her friend said, head tilted back just enough to reveal a slender line of neck that seemed designed to tempt. I told myself I wouldn't stare, but of course I did. And when her eyes finally met mine across the room, it felt less like chance and more like a verdict. Back then I was already tired. Tired of half-hearted relationships, tired of promises people didn't intend to keep, tired of pretending I was fine when deep down, I knew I was just drifting. Claire felt like a cure for all of that, or at least a distraction strong enough to numb the ache. We talked that night until the bar closed, her voice warm with a confidence that drew me deeper, her smile both knowing and evasive. She asked about my life with a kind of precision, like she wanted to collect every piece of me before deciding what to do with it. And I let her. It wasn't long before we were inseparable. She had this way of making the world shrink until it was just the two of us. Long nights spent in her apartment with the city lights bleeding through the blinds, mornings tangled in sheets that smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. She was unpredictable, reckless even, but in those early days, that recklessness felt like freedom. When she dragged me out of bed at midnight just to drive to the coast and watch the waves crash under a pale moon, I didn't question it. When she disappeared for a day or two without explanation and returned with a crooked smile, I told myself not to care. But the truth is, I did care. I cared too much. And maybe she saw that weakness in me before I even realized it. The first crack appeared one Sunday morning. I woke in her bed, sunlight slanting through the curtains, and reached for her only to find the sheets cold. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, and there she was, phone pressed to her ear, whispering urgently. She didn't notice me right away, and for a moment I caught something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not affection, not warmth, something sharper, secretive. When she turned and saw me, she forced a smile, slid the phone into her pocket, and said it was just her sister. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. From then on, small things began to gnaw at me. The way she would vanish without warning. The late-night texts she hid with a flick of her wrist. The perfume that sometimes lingered on her clothes that wasn't hers. Each detail alone was harmless enough, but together they painted a picture I wasn't ready to face. And yet, instead of walking away, I clung tighter. That's the thing about people like me. We mistake devotion for proof of love, when in reality, it's often the rope that strangles us. One evening, while sitting across from her at a dimly lit restaurant, I watched her laugh at something I said, but her eyes, those storm-colored eyes, were somewhere else entirely. I remember thinking, she's already halfway gone, and even then I couldn't let go. What I didn't know was that the betrayal I feared wasn't just around the corner. It had already begun. It was late September when I learned the truth, or at least, a fraction of it. I had been restless all evening, unable to shake the nagging suspicion that Claire was hiding more than just harmless secrets. She had told me she was going to visit her mother, a story she'd used before, but her voice had trembled ever so slightly when she said it. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to convince myself I was paranoid before ending up outside her apartment. The lights were off, her car was gone, and I sat there in the dark like a fool, staring at the empty windows. I should have left. Instead, I waited. Something in me refused to let it go. Hours passed before headlights finally swept across the lot. I ducked low, ashamed of myself, yet unable to look away. Claire stepped out of the passenger side of a sleek black car, her laughter cutting through the night. A man followed, tall, sharply dressed, his hand brushing her lower back in a way that was both casual and intimate. She didn't flinch. She leaned into it. And in that instant, the world I thought we shared collapsed in silence. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. I sat in my car with my fists clenched so tight my knuckles ached, fighting the urge to storm after them. But I didn't want a scene. I wanted answers, and scenes rarely give you those. So I drove home with my chest hollowed out and a question burning through me. Who the hell was he? The next morning, Claire showed up at my door with croissants and coffee, smiling as though nothing had happened. I stared at her, trying to read the guilt in her face, but she was flawless, untouchable. When she kissed me, I tasted lipstick and lies, and for the first time I didn't kiss her back. "Something wrong?" she asked, tilting her head, her eyes scanning mine. I almost told her right then, almost demanded the truth. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I shook my head and let her talk about trivial things, nodding while my insides twisted. That's the cruelty of love. You can know someone is betraying you and still be terrified of losing them. The days that followed were a blur of half-truths and silent accusations. I became a detective in my own relationship, checking her phone when she left it unattended, memorizing numbers, watching for inconsistencies in her stories. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. Every breadcrumb I uncovered led me deeper into the maze, and at the center of it all was that man. I finally saw him again 2 weeks later. Claire had canceled our plans at the last minute, claiming she wasn't feeling well. My gut told me otherwise. I drove to the edge of town where I knew she sometimes went, and sure enough, there she was, seated at a corner cafe, sunlight glinting off her hair, and across from her sat the same man. Their hands were intertwined on the table like something practiced, something comfortable. I stayed hidden, but inside something broke. Betrayal doesn't just cut, it corrodes, eating at your trust, your pride, your very sense of who you are. Watching them together, I felt like I was staring at a version of her I never knew existed. The woman who whispered promises in my bed was the same woman who laughed freely in another man's company. That night when she came to me, I asked no questions. I played the part she expected, smiling when I had to, pretending I didn't notice the faint trace of cologne clinging to her clothes that wasn't mine. But beneath it all, my resolve hardened. If she wouldn't tell me the truth, I would drag it out myself. I began to follow her, discreet at first, then more brazen. She met him often, sometimes in crowded places, sometimes in shadows. They never kissed where others could see, but the intimacy between them was undeniable. I kept telling myself I would confront her, but each time the opportunity came, fear paralyzed me. Fear of her denial, fear of her leaving, fear of facing the fact that maybe I was never enough. Then came the night that changed everything. Claire had been distant all day, distracted, her phone buzzing with messages she dismissed with a flick of her hand. Around midnight, she announced she had to run out for a bit. Something in her tone told me not to follow, but of course I did. She drove to a hotel on the outskirts of the city, her headlights slicing through the fog. I parked a safe distance behind and watched her disappear inside. Minutes later, the man appeared, striding through the revolving doors like he belonged there. My pulse hammered so loud I thought it might give me away. I should have walked in, should have demanded the truth right then. But instead I sat there in the dark, trembling until the hours bled into dawn. When they finally emerged, laughing softly, her hair a mess, his hand at the small of her back, the last thread of denial snapped. That was the night I realized Claire wasn't just betraying me. She was living another life entirely. The morning after the hotel, I felt like a man carrying a secret too heavy to keep but too dangerous to release. I went through the motions of my day, but everything around me seemed hollow. Food tasted like cardboard, conversations blurred into meaningless noise. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Claire slipping out of that hotel lobby with him, her smile radiant, her hand brushing his arm as though he were the only man in the world. For a few days, I told myself I needed clarity before confronting her. Maybe there was an explanation, though I couldn't imagine what could possibly justify what I had seen. I started digging deeper, reckless with obsession. The man's face became etched in my mind. I scoured social media, asked discreet questions through friends, followed trails that seemed to vanish into smoke. But then one night, while scrolling through photos from a mutual acquaintance's gallery, I found him. His name was Daniel. He was no stranger, though I wished he had been. He was a colleague of mine, someone I had worked alongside at the firm for years. We weren't close, but we shared beers after late nights, swapped jokes at meetings, nodded in recognition of each other's ambitions. The revelation hit harder than I expected. Betrayal from Claire was one thing. Betrayal from him, that was a knife between the ribs. The next day at work, I watched him carefully. He moved with the same confidence he always had, his suit pressed, his smile effortless. When our eyes met, he gave a nod, casual, unbothered, as if he hadn't just stolen the ground from beneath me. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. That night when Claire came over, I studied her as though she were a puzzle I'd been too blind to solve. She kissed me, talked about meaningless things, curled up on my couch as if everything was normal. The audacity of it all made my skin crawl. Finally, I couldn't hold it anymore. "Claire," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "who's Daniel?" For the briefest second, her body stiffened. It was so subtle most wouldn't have noticed, but I did. Then she laughed, a brittle, unconvincing sound. "He's just a guy from work, isn't he yours too? Why?" The lie rolled so easily off her tongue that it chilled me. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but instead, I swallowed it. I wasn't ready for her excuses, her deflections. I needed her to confess without me feeding her the lines. So I simply nodded and let the silence grow heavy between us. From then on, my nights became a theater of rehearsals. I would lie awake imagining how the confrontation would unfold, what I'd say, how she'd react, whether she'd finally show me even a flicker of remorse. But when the moments came, I faltered. She had a way of disarming me, of making me question my own eyes, my own memory. Gaslighting, though I didn't call it that then. And then came the twist I never saw coming. One Saturday, Claire asked me to drive her to a gallery opening downtown. I agreed, though my trust in her was long eroded. As we entered the bright, echoing hall, I froze. Daniel was there, standing casually near the bar, chatting with a group of people, a glass of wine in his hand. Claire squeezed my arm, her expression unreadable, and for a moment I thought she'd panic. But she didn't. She walked me straight over to him. "Daniel," she said with a smile that cut like glass, "you know Michael, right?" Daniel turned to me, his grin practiced, his handshake firm. "Of course. Good to see you, man." The room spun. They played their parts perfectly, two acquaintances, nothing more. And I stood there like a fool, shaking the hand of the man who had been in my lover's bed hours before. My chest burned with humiliation. The rest of the night was a blur. I watched them carefully, waiting for a slip, but they were careful, too careful. If anyone else had been watching, they would have seen nothing unusual. Only I knew the truth simmering beneath the surface. When I dropped Claire off later, she kissed me softly and whispered, "Thank you for tonight," as if nothing were wrong, as if I weren't breaking apart inside. That was when I realized the game was bigger than I thought. Claire wasn't just lying, she was orchestrating. She wanted me uncertain, off balance, doubting my own instincts. And Daniel played along with her seamlessly. It wasn't just an affair, it was something else, something darker. I didn't sleep the night after the gallery. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, every muscle in my body locked with tension. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore, it was the performance. Claire and Daniel had choreographed their deceit so flawlessly that they made me question my own sanity. To everyone else, they were nothing but passing acquaintances. To me, they were conspirators, mocking me with their composure. The following weeks became a nightmare of shadows. Claire would appear at my door with that same disarming smile, curling into me as though I was the only man in her world, and then vanish into her other life with Daniel. Every instinct screamed at me to end it, to walk away before it destroyed me completely. But I couldn't. Love, if that's what it still was, had its claws too deep in my chest. Or maybe it wasn't love at all by then. Maybe it was addiction. One night I decided to confront Daniel instead. I waited until most of the office had cleared out, then approached his desk. My voice was low, steady. "We need to talk." He looked up, expression calm, almost bored. "About what?" "You know what." For a moment his eyes flickered with something: guilt, recognition, maybe amusement. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "If you've got something to say, say it." The words tangled in my throat. I expected denial, maybe even anger, but his composure threw me off. Finally, I muttered, "Stay away from her." His smile was faint, mocking. "She's not yours to control, Michael. You know that." I left before I did something violent, but his words echoed in my head like a curse. "She's not yours to control." He was right in a way. Claire was never mine, not fully. She belonged to herself, or maybe to no one at all. The following weekend, I decided I couldn't keep living in the fog. I needed to hear it from her, raw and unvarnished. I invited Claire over, set 2 glasses on the table, and poured us both whiskey. For a while, we sat in silence, the amber liquid glowing between us. "Who is he to you?" I finally asked. My voice shook, but I held her gaze. Her lips curved into a small smile, the kind that always seemed to hide more than it revealed. "Who do you think he is?" My fist tightened around the glass. "Don't play games, Claire, just tell me the truth." She sighed, leaned back in her chair, and for once the mask slipped. There was no laughter, no feigned confusion, just a heavy stillness. "He's someone I needed," she said quietly. "Someone who gave me what you couldn't." The words sliced through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "And what exactly is that?" Her eyes flickered, stormy and unreadable. "A different version of myself. With you, I'm one thing. With him, I'm something else. Maybe I need both." The honesty was worse than any lie. I wanted her to deny it, to reassure me, to feed me some illusion I could cling to. Instead, she gave me the kind of truth that left no room for comfort. "Do you love him?" I asked. She hesitated too long, then softly, "I don't know." I laughed bitterly, though there was nothing funny about it. "You do know, after all this." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. For the first time, I saw her clearly, not as the savior I once thought she was, not even as the betrayer who haunted my nights, but as a woman fractured by desires she couldn't contain. That night after she left, I sat in the dark with the taste of whiskey and ashes in my mouth. I knew I should walk away. I knew staying meant bleeding out slowly. But every time I pictured my life without her, it felt like staring into an abyss. Days turned into weeks, and still I couldn't let go. I followed her less, confronted her less, but the obsession didn't fade. Instead, it transformed into something darker, a hunger to understand why. Why she needed him. Why she still came back to me. Why I couldn't sever the cord that bound us, even as it strangled me. Then came the phone call that tore the last remnants of certainty from my hands. It was past midnight when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Claire's name glowed on the screen. I answered quickly, but instead of her voice, I heard silence. Then, faintly, muffled sobs. "Claire," I said, sitting upright, "what's wrong?" Her voice cracked through the line, trembling and raw. "Michael, I need you." That was all she said before the call cut off. I was out the door in seconds, heart pounding, mind racing with possibilities. Betrayal, love, anger, all of it blurred into one sharp instinct. She was in trouble, and despite everything, I had to find her. What I didn't know was that night would unravel everything I thought I understood about Claire, about Daniel, and about myself. I drove faster than I should have, the city blurring past me in streaks of neon and asphalt. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. Claire's broken voice echoed in my head, "Michael, I need you." It wasn't a plea I could ignore, not even after everything. maybe especially after everything. Her apartment was dark when I arrived. I pounded on the door, called her name, but no answer came. A sick feeling spread through me as I tried the handle. It was unlocked. Inside, the air was heavy with silence, and for a terrifying moment I thought I was too late. Then I heard it, the faint sound of muffled crying coming from her bedroom. I found her curled up on the floor, mascara streaked across her cheeks, hands trembling as if she'd been clawing at her own skin. When she saw me, she collapsed against my chest, sobbing into my shirt. "He left," she whispered. "Daniel, he left me." For a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. After all the secrecy, the lies, the nights of betrayal, it came down to this. She had been abandoned. And somehow, she wanted me to be the one to hold her together. "Why call me?" I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. Her eyes lifted to mine, swollen and red. "Because you're the only one who ever stayed." The words tore at me, but I couldn't tell if they were comfort or cruelty. I held her anyway because that's who I was, broken but still hers. For hours we sat like that, the night crawling toward dawn. In the weeks that followed, Claire leaned on me more than ever. She confessed pieces of the truth, not all of it, never all, but enough. Daniel hadn't just been an affair, he'd been a fantasy, an escape. He promised her things I never could, whispered dreams of a life that didn't exist. And when the illusion cracked, he vanished without a trace, leaving her with nothing but regret. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think maybe this was our chance to start over, to rebuild from the rubble. And for a while, it almost felt possible. We slipped into a fragile rhythm, me pretending I didn't notice the shadows in her eyes, her pretending she wasn't still haunted by him. We played house in a world made of glass, both of us praying it wouldn't shatter. But glass always breaks. One evening, months later, I came home to find her gone. No note, no warning, just absence. Her clothes were still in the closet, her perfume still lingering in the air, but she was nowhere to be found. I called her phone until it went straight to voicemail. Days stretched into weeks and still nothing. Then one morning, I received a postcard. No return address, just a picture of a coastal town we had once driven to on a reckless midnight trip. On the back, in her handwriting, were 5 words: "Don't look for me, Michael." I sat at the kitchen table with that postcard burning in my hands, and for the first time I understood. Claire had never belonged to me, or to Daniel, or to anyone. She was a storm that could never be captured, a fire that consumed everything in its path, and I had been both her shelter and her casualty. It's been years since then. I've built a life of sorts, steady and quiet, though sometimes I still wake in the middle of the night with the ghost of her laughter echoing in my ears. I tell myself I'm free, that I survived her, but freedom doesn't mean forgetting. People ask me sometimes if I'd take her back, if she ever appeared at my door again with that same dangerous smile. I wish I could say no. I wish I could claim I've outgrown her. But the truth is, Claire will always be the unfinished chapter of my life, the one that bleeds into every page that follows. And maybe that's the real betrayal. Not what she did to me, not even what Daniel did, but what I allowed myself to endure, what I chose to forgive, what I still carry even now. Because love, when twisted with obsession, doesn't die. It lingers waiting, and sometimes I fear it waits for her.